Wisconsin Eye is in La Crosse at the 2015 Republican State Convention. Thanks to Congressman Paul Ryan for talking to us. Thank you, Paul, for sitting down.
Good to be back with you.
The Republicans have control of Congress since a few months now. What have you guys done right?
We've done quite a few things, actually. We're actually passing legislation, go figure. The Senate is actually taking votes on things. They've already far eclipsed the productivity of the Senate when Harry Reid was running it. Put Keystone Pipeline on the president's desk, which unfortunately he vetoed. For 14 years, we've had this bizarre Medicare system for doctors that meant they were going to get cut every year, and we were seeing a mass exodus of physicians leaving Medicare.
The doc fix, yep.
The doc fix. So we fixed this once and for all permanently and fixed this flaw in Medicare so that doctors have the comfort of knowing that they're not going to have a 21% payment cut, the next month. So we fixed Medicare. Now we're in the middle of passing bipartisan trade legislation. Oh, and also, for the first time since the early 2000s, the House and the Senate have both passed a budget that balances the budget and pays off the debt. That has now been passed. That's just within the first 4 months of this new legislature. So energy legislation, Medicare legislation, saving physicians from leaving the program, a balanced budget, and now we're working on opening up markets for Wisconsin products, which is important for jobs and growth and wages.
Let's talk about trade. You said, and I'm quoting you, there were 48 trade agreements in Asia since 2000. We were a part of two of them, only two. Is this your backing for the Trans-Pacific trade deal?
Right, so we don't have a TPP yet. I think people are a little confused. This is an ongoing negotiation that hasn't been completed.
Right.
It won't be completed if we don't have what we call Trade Promotion Authority, which is the process that is necessary to getting good high standard trade agreements. But getting a good high standard trade agreement with countries of the Pacific is extremely important for us in America for a number of reasons. As you mentioned in that quote, there are already many trade agreements going on in Asia, and America hasn't been party to most of them, and that means America is losing. Our share of trade to this region has gone down 42%. That means other countries are getting those markets that we're not. By the year 2030, there are going to be 3.2 billion people in Asia in the middle class. This is a huge market for America, a huge market for Wisconsin. And so the problem is, if 95% of the world's consumers don't live in this country but live in other countries, we need to lower those trade barriers so that we can make and grow things in Wisconsin and America and send them and sell them overseas. With all these trade barriers, without trade agreements, what ends up happening is you outsource jobs. American companies, if they want to get access to those markets, have to manufacture in those countries. That's what we don't want to see happen. That's why we want trade agreements, to get rid of those barriers so we can make it here and send it there. And that's what you need for jobs. 1 in 5 jobs in America and in Wisconsin are tied to trade. And these jobs on average pay more. So it just goes to say that we need to have more trade agreements. If you add up all the countries we have trade agreements with, we got a trade surplus. You add up all the countries we don't have trade agreements with, we have a big deficit. So the goal here is get good trade agreements that are good standards, that bring other countries to our standards and open up their markets to our products, just like we already have done that for other countries. So I want fair trade that gives us access. Last point I would make about this, Steve, is if we don't write the rules of the global economy, particularly in Asia, China is going to do that, and that is not in our interest.
Let's talk about the Patriot Act. Who's right, the U.S. Senate, where we should extend it 5 years, or the bill that
I've already taken my position on that. I think the House was right. I think the court was right. In Section 215, we can get a little into the details here, but I think both the Obama and the Bush administration exceeded the authority in the Patriot Act, and so we in the House have reconstrained this metadata collection activity so that current practices by the federal government conform to the original intent of the Patriot Act. And so we want to rework the Patriot Act to further protect civil liberties while also guaranteeing national security. And that's why the House is the version we prefer, that we passed, that I voted for, which is a little different than some in the Senate are preferring, which is just a straight extension.
You were interviewed twice last week on poverty. I'm just curious, let's just agree that 45 million people living in poverty today is wrong. So we spent 50 years and trillions of dollars. Right. What's the next best approach, sir?
I think the next best approach is to assess the fact that the current strategies that we have aren't working, look at why aren't they working, and in many ways, I would argue, we have all of these federal programs that when you stack them up on top of each other, they end up serving as a disincentive to work. They end up serving as sort of a big tax on people who want to go from welfare to work because they lose more in benefits if they leave benefits and go to a job. And we want to remove that disincentive. So we will always want to make work pay. And so we think we need to do another round of welfare reform to ease the transition to work, to push and pull people out of poverty into work. And the last point I would make is, I think the federal government has been too top-heavy, too top-down, and too bureaucratized. I think we need to resuscitate local communities, local governments, local solutions, so that people who are on the streets, who are fighting poverty person to person, eye to eye, soul to soul, are more empowered to be able to actually transition individuals who in need. We can't treat poverty with one big broad brush, all these big sterile rules in Washington, and assume we've got it all figured out. That's in many cases what the war on poverty did, and it hasn't worked. And so some local control, getting it down to the grassroots, down to the community levels, while also making sure that the resources are there to ease a person from welfare to work. And that's why we think we need to do another round of welfare reform, and that's what I, as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, am committed to doing.
Is this another argument for block grants to states, who you have said in the past?
It's not exactly block grants, but it is getting more state control, more federalism. But I would drill past just state government, and I believe, and I've offered some ideas for this, we need to more customize a welfare benefit to a person's particular needs and free up other agencies to compete for offering those benefits to people. So you don't have just some government monopoly in charge of welfare, but why not have, say, Catholic Charities or Lutheran Social Services or businesses like America Works that is doing a good job in Milwaukee be in the game of competing for getting people from welfare to work. So what we want to do is go with performance-based welfare reform, outcome-based welfare reform, where success is completely measured on not how much money we're spending or how many programs we're creating, but are we actually getting people out of poverty? Find out the ideas that work, go with what works, and then back what works so that we can focus on actually getting people out of poverty.
And final question, your party's got 12, 14, 16 candidates for president.
16, last I heard.
And you probably every day get up saying, I'm thankful that I chose not to run. But let's talk about, is that number of presidential candidates, could that be harmful in splitting the party and electing Hillary Clinton?
Oh, I don't think so. I think Reince Priebus, our chair, is a good Kenosha guy, has done a good job of sort of streamlining the primary process so that it will be a good process that puts our nominee in a more strengthened position to be successful in the general election. I chair the fund for the general election, so yes. I'm basically with Reince pre-assembling the presidential campaign so that it's there for that person when he or she arrives in the nomination. And with 16 candidates going out there, I think the field will winnow down. I think the debates, they'll find a way of bringing some common sense to the debates that are occurring. And I have every reason to believe that we'll be in a very good position to win.
What's at stake if Hillary wins and she's the next president?
You'll have basically a third Obama term. I think you'll see the dangerous trajectory in foreign and military policy we have right now, that will be continued. I think you'll have a big top-heavy government that is over-regulating small businesses, that is giving us stagnant flat wages, and a government that is unwilling to address the fiscal crises that are before us, which means we'll be continuing to go toward a debt crisis. We've got big problems in America, but they can be solved, and they can be solved on our own terms if we lead. If you have another third Obama term, I'm afraid that that won't happen, and that's effectively what a Clinton presidency would do.
Congressman Paul Ryan, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you, Steve.
Thanks.